I came home from a 3-day conference in Ottawa on a Thursday evening, and the moment I turned my key in the front door, I knew something was wrong. The lights in the living room were all on. Every single one of them. My husband never turned on the overhead light. He always said it was too harsh, that it gave him a headache. But there it was, blazing through the frosted glass panel beside the door, flooding the porch with yellow light. I stood on the front step for a moment, my rolling bag behind me, the November air biting at my neck, and I thought, had something happened to someone? Was my mother-in-law ill? I pushed open the door. My husband was sitting on the couch. My brother was in the armchair beside the fireplace. My daughter-in-law was perched on the ottoman near the window, not looking at me. And my son, my own son, Thomas, was standing near the kitchen doorway with his arms crossed, the way his father used to stand when he was about to deliver bad news. Nobody said hello. I set my bag down slowly. "What's going on?" I asked. "Is everyone okay?" My husband cleared his throat. He didn't stand up. He didn't walk over to take my coat the way he had done for 31 years. He just sat there with his hands on his knees and said, "Margaret, we need to talk, all of us, tonight." I looked at my brother. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I took off my own coat and hung it on the hook by the door. I told myself to breathe. I told myself that whatever this was, I had handled difficult things before. I was 63 years old. I had buried a parent, raised a son, built a bookkeeping firm from a spare bedroom in a rented townhouse into a business with 11 employees and clients across 3 provinces. I was not the kind of woman who fell apart in her own hallway. But I was also not the kind of woman who had ever walked into a room and felt like a stranger in her own home. Until that night. My husband's name is Gerald. We met at a Canada Day barbecue in Guelph in 1991. He was 32, I was 28, and he laughed at a joke I made about potato salad, and I thought, this one is worth keeping. We married the following spring. We built a life in Burlington, Ontario, raised Thomas, bought the house on Rossmore Crescent, planted the maple tree in the backyard that is now taller than the roof. For 31 years, I believed we were solid. Gerald had never been a flashy man. He worked in municipal engineering for 20 years, took an early retirement package at 55, and spent his days puttering volunteering at the conservation area, helping Thomas with renovation projects, driving my mother to her appointments before she passed. He was steady and quiet, and I loved him for it. My brother's name is Roy. He is 4 years younger than me, and for most of our adult lives we have been close. When our mother got sick, Roy and I took turns driving to Kitchener every second weekend. He was at our house for every Christmas, every Thanksgiving. Gerald and Roy got along well. They watched hockey together, talked about fishing, had the easy camaraderie of men who had chosen not to complicate things. What I did not know, what I had no reason to suspect, was that sometime in the previous 18 months, my husband and my brother had been quietly discussing my business behind my back. Gerald sat me down that Thursday night and told me, in a careful, measured voice, as though he had rehearsed it, that he and Roy had been in conversations with a man named Dale Hutchinson, an acquaintance of Roy's from his golf club in Hamilton, about a potential acquisition of my firm. He said they had been concerned about me. He said the business had been stressful for me, that I wasn't sleeping well, that I had been short-tempered, that maybe it was time to think about what the next chapter looked like. He said he and Roy had been trying to help. I sat very still. Then Roy spoke. He said that Dale was serious, that the offer was fair, that if I would just listen with an open mind I would see that this was actually a good thing. He said he had power of attorney for financial decisions, which was true. I had given it to him 3 years earlier when I went into hospital for a knee replacement and needed someone to manage bill payments. He said he had used it to sign a letter of intent on my behalf. I turned and looked at him. "You signed a letter of intent," I said. "It's not binding," he said quickly. "It just opens the door to—" "Roy." My voice came out very quiet. "You signed a legal document using my power of attorney for the sale of my business, without telling me." Thomas uncrossed his arms. "Mom, just hear them out. They're trying to do what's best for—" "Thomas!" I held up one hand. "Please don't." My daughter-in-law, Priya, looked at the floor. I stood up. I picked up my handbag. I looked at Gerald, who was still sitting on the couch with his hands on his knees, and I said, "I'm going to go upstairs now. I need you all to leave." Gerald said, "Margaret, be reasonable." "I am being perfectly reasonable," I said. "I am asking you to leave my house while I think." Our house, Gerald said. Those 2 words. I still hear them sometimes, late at night. Our house, said not as a reminder of what we had built together, but as a correction, as a claim. I went upstairs. I heard them talking in low voices below. I heard the front door open and close, Roy and Priya and Thomas leaving. Gerald stayed. I could hear him moving around the kitchen, the familiar sounds of him filling the kettle, opening the cupboard where we kept the mugs. I sat on the edge of the bed and I called my friend Diane, who had been my accountant for 15 years before she retired, and I told her what had just happened. Diane said 3 things. She said, "Find out exactly what Roy signed." She said, "Call a lawyer in the morning, not afternoon, morning." And she said, "Do not discuss anything further with Gerald tonight." I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat in the dark for a long time. Here is what I had not told anyone, including Gerald. 18 months earlier, I had noticed something odd in the firm's operating account. A series of small transfers, nothing dramatic, nothing that would trigger an automatic flag, each one under $3,000, moving from the business account into a holding account I didn't recognize. Over 14 months, the total came to just under $38,000. I am a bookkeeper. I have been a bookkeeper for 35 years. I notice things like this the way other people notice when a picture frame is crooked. I did not confront anyone. I did not call the bank. I opened a file on my personal laptop, not my work computer, and I began documenting everything. Every transfer, every date, every account number. I hired a private investigator named Carol out of Mississauga who specialized in financial fraud, and over the following 3 months, she traced the holding account to a numbered company registered in Alberta. The director of that numbered company was my brother Roy. Roy had been siphoning money from my business. Not a catastrophic amount, not enough to threaten the firm's operations, but enough to matter, enough to be a crime. Carol estimated that if the pattern had continued for another 2 years, the total would have exceeded $100,000. I had been deciding what to do with that information. I had been careful and methodical, the way I had always been careful and methodical, because I wanted to be sure. I wanted documentation that could not be disputed. I wanted to do this right. And then Gerald and Roy had arranged a meeting in my living room to tell me they had signed away my business. The next morning I drove to a law firm in downtown Burlington, not the firm our family had used for years, a different one that Roy had no connection to, and I sat across from a lawyer named Jennifer Park, and I put Carol's file on the table and I told her everything. Jennifer looked through the documents for a long time, then she looked up at me and said, "How long have you had this?" "About 4 months," I said. She nodded slowly. "And the power of attorney your brother used to sign the letter of intent, was it a general POA, or was there a specific scope?" "It was limited to personal bill payments during a period of medical incapacity," I said. "I was clear about that when I had it drafted." Jennifer smiled, just slightly. "Then the letter of intent is not valid," she said. "Using a limited POA outside its stated scope is not just a civil matter, Mrs. Calloway. Combined with the financial transfers your investigator documented, your brother has significant legal exposure here." I nodded. I had known this. I had needed to hear it from someone else. "I'd like to send a letter," I said, to Dale Hutchinson, informing him that the letter of intent was executed without valid authority and is null and void. "Absolutely," Jennifer said. "We can have that out today. And I'd like you to contact the police," I said, "about the transfers." Jennifer looked at me carefully. "That will affect your family significantly." "Yes," I said, "it will." I drove home and packed a bag. Not because I was leaving permanently, this was my house. My name was on the title. I had paid the down payment from the sale of my first condo, but because I needed a few days away from Gerald while I thought clearly. I drove to my friend Diane's place in Oakville. She had a guest room with a good bed and she made strong tea, and she did not ask me more questions than I wanted to answer. Gerald called 11 times that first day. Roy called twice and then stopped. Thomas called in the evening, and I answered. "Mom," he said, "where are you? Dad is worried." "I'm safe," I told him. "I'm with Diane." "What's happening? Dad won't tell me anything." "Your father and your uncle tried to arrange the sale of my business without my knowledge or consent," I said. "I'm handling it." There was a long pause. "Mom, I think they were just—" "Thomas," I said gently, "I know you love your father. I know you trust your uncle, but I need you to let me handle this without taking sides right now. Can you do that?" Another pause, then, "Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry, Mom." "I know," I said. "I love you." I stayed at Diane's for 4 days. On the second day, Jennifer Parks sent the letter to Dale Hutchinson, voiding the letter of intent. He responded through his own lawyer within 24 hours, withdrawing from the proposed acquisition entirely. He had apparently done his own due diligence in the meantime and was not interested in a transaction that might attract legal scrutiny. On the third day, 2 officers from the Hamilton Police Financial Crimes Unit visited Roy at his home in Ancaster and informed him he was under investigation for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. Roy called me 6 times in the following hour. I did not answer. I sent him one text message: "My lawyer will be in touch." On the 4th day, Gerald drove to Diane's house and sat in my car in her driveway and called me from the front seat. I watched him from the guest room window. I watched him sit there for 40 minutes. Then I went downstairs and knocked on his window. He looked older than I had ever seen him. He said, "Margaret, I didn't know about the money. I swear to you I didn't know what Roy was doing." I stood there in the cold driveway in my coat, and I believed him. Gerald was many things: passive, conflict avoidant, too easily persuaded by people he trusted, but he was not dishonest. The acquisition scheme had been Roy's idea. Gerald had gone along with it because Roy had convinced him it was the kind thing to do, that I was exhausted, that I needed someone to make a hard decision for me. "You used our house as a bargaining point," I said, "when I asked you to leave." He looked at his hands. "I know," he said. "That was wrong." "Yes," I said, "it was." I told him I was coming home that afternoon. I told him we had a great deal to work through and I did not know yet what the outcome of that would be. I told him that what I needed from him immediately was complete transparency. No more conversations with Roy about my business or my life. No more decisions made on my behalf without my knowledge. He agreed to all of it. He was so thoroughly ashamed of himself that I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Roy was charged 8 months later. The Crown Prosecutor's Office in Hamilton pursued the case, and Roy ultimately pleaded guilty to fraud under $100,000 and breach of trust. He was sentenced to 18 months of house arrest, 2 years of probation, and ordered to repay the full $38,000 plus legal costs. He has not spoken to me since the day I sent that text message. I suspect he won't. My son Thomas came to me about 2 weeks after everything became public. He sat at my kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee and he said, "Mom, I stood in your living room and I told you to just hear them out. I'm sorry. I should have asked you what you thought, instead of assuming they were right." I put my hand over his. "You didn't know," I said, "and you came here." "I'll always come here," he said. That meant more to me than I have the words to say. Gerald and I are still together. We see a couples therapist in Burlington every other Wednesday, a practical woman named Dr. Osei, who does not let either of us be vague. It is slow work. It is sometimes uncomfortable work. But Gerald shows up every single time, and somewhere in my 63 years of living, I learned that showing up is not nothing. Showing up is, in fact, quite a lot. My firm is still mine. All 11 employees. All the clients across 3 provinces. The spare bedroom in the rented townhouse is long gone, but the business it produced is very much intact, and I run it every single day. I think sometimes about the night I came home from Ottawa and stood on my own front porch and saw all the lights blazing. I think about how I felt in that moment, the cold at my neck, the unease in my stomach, the instinct that something had shifted in the order of things. What I know now is that it had shifted, just not in the direction anyone in that living room had anticipated. I had been building something for 35 years. And unlike the men in that room who thought I was tired, who thought I needed to be managed, who thought the most convenient version of my life was the one they had arranged without me, I was the only one in that house who understood exactly what I had built and exactly what I would do to keep it. The maple tree in the backyard is still taller than the roof. I planted it myself the spring after Thomas was born with a shovel I borrowed from my neighbor. I stood out there last October in my garden boots and I looked up at it for a long time. Some things, once you put them in the ground and tend to them properly, simply cannot be taken away.